Hi folks, and welcome back to Dungeons and Drybrushing. My name is Daniel, and his name is Brutogg Corpse Eater, of the Oxford Corpse Eaters. I mean, you can't even blame the parents at that point, right? If your last name's Corpse Eater, you pretty much gotta just lean into it. It's not like you can name him Reginald.
Hello, I'm Reginald Corpse Eater. What a pleasure to meet you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to bash you about the head a little.
Actually, that's kind of funny. I start the slap chop process with the same steps as always. A prime with a black rattlekin, a dry brush of grey, followed by a dry brush of white. Make sure you leave time for each layer to dry completely before moving on to the next one, otherwise you risk obscuring the details instead of highlighting them. Once that's dry, I select Basilicanum Grey contrast paint for the fur trim on his armor and boots. This is a neutral grey that will give the fur a little character without drawing too much attention to it. Just be careful when picking out these tiny areas. When using slap chop, you want to do your best to not get paint on the other parts of the model. Brutogg clearly never misses shoulder day, and he makes sure everybody knows it by foregoing shirt sleeves. This is just Kill 'em in Flesh contrast paint. I try to be careful not to let it pool too much, and to let the steps that we've already done do the work of giving the muscles and face definition. The next paint is really kind of the workhorse paint on this model, and for that I chose Wildwood. It's a very dark, cool brown that will contrast well with all of the metallic paints I'll be adding later. I use this for most of the leather on the model, which is a lot, actually. The boots are leather, and the majority of Brutogg's armor is metal plates over a leather coat. Most metallic paints will actually provide a richer color if they're applied over a dark coat of paint though, so I don't even try to avoid painting the metal plates on the armor. In fact, I make sure that his chain shirt and the plates get a nice coat of it too. I get out snakebite leather for all of the belts, leather straps, and pouches though, just to add a bit of extra interest. I noticed too that there's a tiny bit of pant leg showing between the end of his long coat and the tops of his boots. I picked out a dark green for this, but it's barely visible on the final model. For the metallics, I get out my Monument Hobbies Pro Acryl paints. I love these metallic paints. They go on smoothly, they have excellent coverage, and the colors are nice and rich. I've tried metallics from just about every company out there, and I've never found one that I like better. The majority of Brutogg's armor and weapons are going to get coated in silver. This does mean carefully picking out all of the plates on his tassets, as well as making sure to work the silver paint into all of those painfully detailed metal rings and onto the tiny buckles of his many belts. But a few pieces of armor I want to be more eye-catching, starting with the elaborate pauldron on his left shoulder. For that, and for all the remaining pieces of armor, I'm using light bronze. This is one of my favorite paints in the lineup, and I use it very regularly. Here it's going to serve as the base coat on the pauldron and knee pads, and just give the model a splash of color and personality. And while I had it out, I decided to pick out some of the extra details on the weapons on his belt too. Then it's my favorite part. To make the pauldron really pop and make it the main focal point for the model, I take Flesh Terror's red and paint it over top of the bronze, except for the very edge. This lets some of the metallic quality show through, but it gives a really bright poppy red color too. Not to mention that these kinds of elaborately sculpted details are really where contrast style paints do their strongest work. This is really a best case use scenario for them. I do have one more trick up my sleeve before we move on to washes though. Brutogg doesn't strike me as the kind of fella that takes meticulous care of his belongings, so I imagine his armor is kind of old and ragged. A quick coat of skeleton horde over the chainmail does a lot to give it a more worn and interesting look. Then it's time to move on to washes. A bit of Reichland Flesh Shade helps to bring some more life to all of the flesh areas of the model. Just like when you're using a contrast paint, you want to watch where your washes pool and just be ready to carefully wick them away if they accumulate too much or if they're pooling in an area you don't like. You don't have to be too delicate with them, but do work quickly. You don't want to disturb the wash once it starts to dry or you'll end up with tide marks on the model. Once I'm done with the flesh parts, I do a careful wash of Nuln Oil over the entire rest of the model. If you're doing something like this, you still want to maintain brush control and keep an eye on pooling. If you get black wash onto the model's skin, then you have a very brief window in which it's easy to fix by cleaning it up with a clean, wet brush. So just be careful. Now I know these are speed painting videos, but I do really like to add at least one extra focal point per model. And for Brutogg, I picked just this big jug he's carrying around with him. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a healing draft of some kind, or if it's just a big jug of post-battle wine. But I base coated it in black and then did a simple wet blend from a dark red at the very bottom of the jug up to a lighter red around the halfway point. I'm careful to leave a line of black around the outside to help with the illusion that this is a glass container. When I'm finished with the quick and dirty wet blend, I add a solid white line at the very top as a reflection. I know that wet blending isn't really a normal speed painting technique and you could completely skip this part and just use your favorite speed or contrast paint if you're more comfortable with that. But with that finished, so is our speed painted Brutogg Corpse Eater. Okay, that pretty much wraps it up for Brutogg, aka Reginald Corpse Eater. This one was actually pretty fun. It's a great model, a lot of cool things on it that you could make focal points of the paint job if you wanted to, and I had a good time with it. It took about, a little less than an hour, I would say, to paint the whole thing, which is not the fastest speed paint ever, but not too bad either. When you're doing this kind of paint job, it's important to keep in mind what your objective is. When it comes to the Cursed City set, I just want some cool paint jobs on the model, something simple and easy to put on the table and make it cool looking and identifiable, at board game distance a couple feet away. And this nails it for me. There are a billion details on this model, as there are on all Games Workshop models, and it's really about picking out which ones you want to highlight, which ones are important to you, and which ones don't really matter so much. Going forward with these videos, I think I'm going to be focusing in on the hero models and on the models required to actually play the first few scenarios of the game so that I can get that going, actually try the game out and see how it plays. Thank you for watching. If you could hit like and subscribe, that would be fantastic. If you want to support the channel, there is a link below to buymeacoffee.com. Those of you who have already used that, thank you so much. It means a lot to me. And thank you for all the great feedback, the wonderful comments, emails, all that stuff. I love it. You guys are awesome. I'll see you on the next one.